joining us on this briefing on the state of the system. The time is 10 o'clock on the 21st of April 2022. André de Ruyter, please do give us a briefing, and can I request colleagues to in the media to start typing their questions. And again, of course, colleagues, I will request you to restrict your questions to the matter at hand, which is the state of the system and load shedding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you again for joining us as we give you this update on the latest state of play with regard to Eskom generation and the implementation of load shedding. Our planned maintenance, we've got 5,172 megawatts out on planned maintenance, so we are staying the course on significant planned maintenance as we have committed to do. Our unplanned losses, full losses, are still too high at 9,907, although I do see that Majuba Unit 3 has just been synchronized to the grid literally as we speak. Our partial load losses are coming down, so that's quite pleasing at 4,396. So the total unplanned losses are sitting at 14,303. You may recall that we were sitting way in excess of 16,000 megawatts of unplanned losses earlier in the week. So the system is recovering. We are seeing some of the big units coming back as planned. Demand forecast for this evening is a shade over 30,000 megawatts, 30,011 megawatts. Our available capacity is at 28,022, which therefore explains why we have to maintain load shedding stage 3 until after evening peak tonight. We intend to drop it then to stage 2, and then by after evening peak on Friday evening, we will be hopefully in a position to lift load shedding in its entirety for the weekend, depending on how the system performs. Our reserves are in quite good shape now. We have 26 pump hours at Drakensberg. Ingula is pretty much full, as is Polmit. Ankerlig diesel levels looking very healthy at 85%. Harikwa, where we've been running diesel extensively, is sitting at 65%, but we think that that is quite a manageable situation, so nothing to be concerned about there. We did lose Grootvlei 2, which is a very small unit, at just before 11 yesterday morning due to a boiler tube leak. But we saw Arnott 2 and 6 come back, as well as Kendall 3, Matimba 5, and now also Majuba 3 has been synchronized to the grid. There is a loss of 270 megawatts due to maintenance done on the line from Kahora Bassa. This maintenance is being conducted in Mozambique by our partners on that line, EDM. So we are doing everything that we can to assist them in order to complete that maintenance. That's quite important. We unfortunately did lose Tutuka 6 this morning, just after 8, due to a submerged scraper chain that got stuck. This chain clears the ash at the bottom of the boiler, and when we cannot clear the ash, obviously we have challenges running the boiler. So that unit has tripped, and once that has been repaired, we look forward to that unit coming back. That leads to a loss of about 365 megawatts. Majuba, as I said, Unit 3 came back quite a bit earlier than planned, so that is quite pleasing, and we'll continue to return units to service over the next 2 days, so that we will be in a position, if all goes well, given all of the risks, that we can then lift load shedding by the weekend. Thank you, Sikonati. That is the brief overview of where we are. Unless Rulani has anything further to add, I think I've given quite a comprehensive overview, but if he has anything further to add, then we can go to Q&A.
Thank you, André. Rulani, do you want a minute to add anything to this update?
Sikonati, thanks. Maybe over and above that, I need to indicate that with all the hard work that the team has put to this morning, I can report that 7 of our power plants are running without a forced outage. And that is your Camden, Matimba, Medupi, Letabo, Kendal, Komati, and Quebec. The only units that are offered that any of those stations are planned. So that I think it's something that shows that we are recovering. And in terms of our units at risk, as I indicated yesterday, we have seen further reduction in terms of the amount of megawatt at risk. This morning sitting at around 7,400 megawatts that are at risk. Obviously, we still need to deal with the issues of the forecasted rain over this coming weekend. The team at different power plants have mobilized to make sure that we can be able to manage the rain forecast, more especially at our power station, Arnold, Camden, Majuba, Kusile, and Grootvlei. Those are the stations that we expect that they will be highly impacted by the coming rain over these coming weekends. But the team, it's ready and mobilizing to make sure that we can deal with that. Thanks, Sikonati.
Thank you, Rulani. Colleagues, his name is Rulani Matebula. He's a general manager in generation. The first question comes from Antoinette Slava of Rapport. What is the highest peak expected this winter? Antoinette, I presume you mean the demand peak expected this winter. Sekgomotso, can I request you to handle that question? Or Rulani? Rulani, please come back. We don't seem to, oh, there you go. Sekgomotso is on. Thank you.
All right. No, thank you very much, Sikonati, for that question. If you give me a few minutes, I'll get the precise number. I don't have it readily at hand. It's something that we have built into the modeling and the analysis, but we'll get the response just now, and maybe we can just even post it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sekgomotso. We'll come back to the response then. The next question comes from Terence Creamer. Colleagues, I wish to make this disclaimer right up front that we will read all the questions that are posed on here. So we do have quite the usual suspects only asking questions, and I don't see many other colleagues in the media asking their questions. Every question that has been posed will be read out and answered. Given that Eskom has acknowledged its skills problem, is there any prospect of approaching the market for operations and maintenance bids at some of the smaller stations so that Eskom could concentrate on its operations and maintenance resources at the larger power stations? Then he says, or alternatively, could IPPs be offered the chance to operate the smaller plants based on power purchase agreements aligned to the plant's decommissioning date? André de Ruyter, please, will you deal with that?
Thanks, Terence. Yes, we are supplementing our own skills by insourcing contractors to look after maintenance of some of our plants. We intend to extend this in order to ensure that we can free up more of our limited resources to look after units at our plants. The strategy is currently under development and being consulted on with our partners in organized labor, so I don't want to elaborate on it too much, except to say that what we are looking at really is to bring in original equipment manufacturers to look at engineering and maintenance, not so much operations and maintenance. So there's a distinction, obviously, between those two. Eskom would still be responsible for operating those power stations. That's where the situation is at the moment with regard to augmenting our skills with more contractor capacity. Thanks.
Thank you, André. The next question comes from William Horn at Netwerk 24. With the 80-odd generation units in Eskom's coal fleet, how many are currently offline? Rulani, can I ask you to confirm first the number of coal-fired generation units and whether you have that number at hand? Thank you. How many are offline?
Yes, Sikonati, we have got 79 coal-fired generation units, and 18 of those at this moment are forced off due to breakdowns, and 8 of those are on planned maintenance, and that is excluding, obviously, Kubek, which will be the 9th unit. Thanks, Sikonati.
Before you go, Rulani, can you elaborate a bit further on that number 18? There are units that have been off for a very long time that may or may not come back. Did you include them in the number 18, please? And if you can say what those are, please do.
The only unit that will be off for longer, it's Majuba Unit number 4. I had not included it on the 18th. On the 18 that I've just indicated. So the rest of the units will be coming back within the next 7 days.
Thank you, sir. I hope that is a sufficient response, William. Faisal Patel of The Citizen says, I understand that you have made mention of 6 critical points government needs to take into consideration to avoid load shedding. Can you please repeat this, André de Ruyter?
Faisal, this has been extensively reported on News 24, so I would suggest that you just look that up. Then we can save everybody some time by not repeating what's already been said. Thank you.
Further to that, there is a recording that you have of that meeting on Tuesday in which this was said. That would have been said in the first 10 minutes of the media briefing on Tuesday, Faisal. Sekumuto, are you able to now answer the question from Antoinette Slabet, please, before we move on to the next one?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sikonati. The estimate for end of May, which is when we expect the highest peak, is of the order of 35,000. Last year, we reached 35,000 megawatts, and we expect more or less the same this coming winter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sekumuto. The next question comes from Shakira. Shakira, I'm probably going to mess up your surname if I tried pronouncing it. Do pardon me. Can you elaborate on what occurs during a generation failure or unit failure? What are the causes and why does this occur so frequently? Shakira, this question again has been answered in every statement that Eskom has ever made and in every media briefing. There are so many issues that can occur at a power station and at a generation unit, which would cause the unit to trip or to be switched off in order for that repair to occur. But Rulani, do you want to spend maybe a minute on that, on the response, please? On the most probable or the highest rate of occurrences?
Yeah, Yeah, as you indicated, Sikonati, there is multiple reasons why a unit would be forced off, either by itself or manually, mainly to protect it from having catastrophic failures. And some of the failures that obviously take us longer to return the units are our boiler tube leaks. As you may know that we have got thousands of kilometers of tubes in each of our boilers, and due to erosion through the ash that passes through the boiler, we at times develop leaks on those tubes, and we have to go in and do the repairs and get out. So those are most of the common causes that we have been communicating, I think, in the past. But there are multiple reasons why each unit would actually be forced off. And many a time it is to actually prevent a catastrophic failure when we have certain faults on any of the units.
Thank you, Rulani. That's sufficient a response. Caleb Kasim, this is yours to tackle from Lungasimelane. How much money has been spent on diesel so far? I'm going to perhaps start by saying this current financial year started on the 1st of April. We are 21 days on it. Perhaps, Caleb, you can tell us what was spent in financial 2022 that ended on the 31st of March. Thank you.
Thanks, Sekonati. I'll also check for this financial year, the 21 days. And if I recall, for the last financial year, we as Eskom have just spent just under 7 billion on our own diesel plants. And in terms of the IPP plants, around 3.5 billion rand that we incurred in the last financial year. Thanks, Sekonati. Thanks.
Thanks, Caleb. That's for between the 1st of April 2021 and the 31st of March 2022, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Colleagues, Caleb Kasim is the Chief Financial Officer of Eskom. Graham Bell from Tech News wants to know what is the current load shedding forecast for next week. Are we able to answer that question at this point, André?
So the prognosis at the moment, Graham, is that we don't anticipate load shedding for next week. However, that is dependent on the stability of our generation units. As we are now by all aware, there are risks in the system that are difficult to forecast and predict. Depending on how we perform over the weekend, also depending on additional rainfall that is forecast for the Mpumalanga area, where of course the majority of our coal plants are located, we may potentially see further impacts, and that may have an impact on availability of generation capacity, particularly for Monday next week. So Monday next week, the forecast is likely to be tight, but after that, if we can bring those units back that are currently planned to return to service, and if we can get additional reduction in partial load losses, then we should be okay. So we don't plan for load shedding next week, but I have to emphasize that, of course, there is always a residual risk.
Thank you, Andre. The next question comes from Terence Kramer, Engineering News. Could you update us on progress regarding the National Transmission Company, South Africa? And that would be the unbundling, I guess. Can you confirm whether prospective board members have been interviewed and selected? If so, Why haven't they been appointed? Have lenders offered their consent? And has NERSA indicated when the transmission license will be transferred to the National Transmission Company of South Africa? Sekgomotsho?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sikonati. With regard to the transmission subsidiary company, yes, the interviews have been conducted by the Eskom Holdings Board, and certain nominations have been forwarded to the ministry for consideration and approval. That process is underway, and I'm sure in due course we'll get the results from that process. Regarding the license, yes, we have made our submission, and we are now working through clarifications with NERSA. At some point, NERSA may require to conduct a public consultation process. We are not quite clear at this stage, but through these engagements, we hope to then get a firmer indication of the timelines for the licensing. And then lastly, regarding the land engagements, the CFO is probably best positioned to deal with it. I know that the engagements have been ongoing, but I do not think we have concluded yet. But I would suggest that we give Caleb an opportunity to respond to that specific question. Thank you.
Caleb, please come in. Thank you.
Thanks, Terence. Yeah, Terence, we are still busy with that engagements on lender consents for transmission separation. Thanks.
Thank you, Caleb. Colleagues, Sekgomotsho Skippers is the head of the transmission division, which will be the National Transmission Company, South Africa. Akona Majuba of MoneyWeb wants to know how effective has the proactive maintenance been so far? And are any of these recently maintained units affected in this latest round of load shedding? Rulani, really the question is, have those units that have recently undergone maintenance been again affected or tripped during this round of load shedding? Thank you.
Yeah, Sikonati, as I indicated, there are many reasons why a unit would be forced off or will trip off the grid. We have not seen a lot of failures on many of the units that we have recently brought back on the grid after long general overall outages. However, it's still an area which requires a lot of focus on our side, but we are comfortable that the maintenance that we are doing, it's really yielding the results that we're looking for.
Thank you, Rulani. William Horn of Network 24 asks again, for the purpose of making sense of breakdowns to our readers, could you explain whether breakdowns occur constantly or whether it is a case of coincidence that breakdowns happen to just synchronize at certain times, necessitating load shedding? Would a metaphor like indicator lights on cars sometimes synchronizing at the traffic light be a correct way of seeing this? William, with respect, I will leave this question unanswered and move on to the next one. Out of the 80 or 79 generation units, as Rulani has just said again, breakdowns occur all the time amongst many of them, and others, other breakdowns take longer to fix, others much shorter. For example, you have to leave a unit for about a whole day before you could actually get in to work in the boiler because of the heat. So some of the breakdowns will take longer to fix and others much shorter and will be back online within reasonable time. The next question from Antoinette Slabe has also been answered on the amount of money spent on diesel. Isabel Fick was answering that question. Isabel works for Eskom in the system operator. She was answering the question about the highest peak during the winter. I'll move on to Terence Kramer again. What authorizations are needed to bring in the original equipment manufacturers in to supplement engineering and maintenance skills at the power stations? What is the expected time frame for implementing this strategy? Andre, can you answer that, please?
Sure, Sikanati. Maybe let's just answer Antoinette's question. What we have spent for April so far, 626 million rand on diesel for the month of April so far. That is about 48.5 million litres of fuel that we have consumed at our open cycle gas turbines. Terence, we are in the process of working with our internal procurement systems in order to get the appropriate bids in place to make sure that we can bring those OEMs on board. Obviously, as I've said, there are also consultations that have to take place with organised labour. Those consultations have commenced and those discussions are taking place. Where we are going to go to a single source, there are certain PFMA requirements that we are also expected to obtain, and those will be met. So once all of these processes are complete, we can then enter into a procurement process with the OEMs, and they can then start to deploy their staff to those units. They will also need to have some time to ramp up. So if all goes well, I think within the next 3 to 6 months, we should be able to see those boots on the ground of the OEMs doing the maintenance and engineering at some units on some power stations. So this is not a strategy that we're going to implement across the board, but only at those power stations that are the significant contributors to unplanned capacity losses. And those are the power stations where the need for bringing in supplementary skills is the greatest.
Thank you for that, Andre. Gallo of News 24 says, Eskom has over the past 3 years explained the challenges the national city needed. Is the shareholder, Mr. Gordon, and the Eskom political task team headed by Deputy President Mabuza alive to these challenges and what Eskom needs? Is there any progress in securing the backing of the government in terms of desperately needed policy changes? André de Ruyter, please tell us if you are getting this support.
Yes, we do engage regularly with our shareholder as well as with the political task team. We have shared with both the shareholder department as well as with the political task team our perspectives. And of course, we are not a policy maker, we are a policy implementer. And once we've communicated that, it's really in the hands of the various policy departments to implement those changes in the context of a broader socio-economic and political environment, which we, of course, are not always privy to. So that is where I think we should leave that particular question. If I can go straight on then to the next question, Sikanati, that Kyle asked regarding National Treasury exemptions. This process is proceeding. We have a very positive precedent where the Minister of Finance has gazetted certain exemptions in favour of Transnet. We believe that Eskom obtaining similar exemptions will be very useful to enable us to accelerate some of our procurement processes. We're receiving good cooperation and support from our colleagues at Department of Public Enterprises, as well as National Treasury. And we're also working closely with our colleagues at Transnet in order to secure a similar exemption. We have not yet received it, but I think we are making good progress towards that. Thanks, Sekonati.
He also talks to the policy makers. He says Eskom is obviously trying its best to address the various challenges, especially inter-area load related. However, has the Eskom leadership given consideration in parallel to what will the future Eskom power crisis entail? André?
Vali, yes, we do spend a lot of time debating the future of the generation system, bearing in mind, of course, that the expected design life of the majority of our coal-fired power stations is rapidly approaching. We therefore cannot run these units in perpetuity. We need to, at some stage, replace them. Clearly, Majuba and Kusile play an important role in partially answering that question. But the major shift that we are seeing in the electricity supply industry is related to the unbundling of Eskom, and in particular, the establishment of the Independent Transmission System and Market Operator, the ITSMO, which is the current transmission business that Segemotso, who leads that business, earlier referred to. And this will enable more private sector investment to replace the capacity that Eskom will retire, either because the plants have reached the end of their lives, or because they've become too expensive to operate, or because their emissions are too great and have a negative impact on the environment, and those emissions will cost too much to abate. We have previously indicated that we intend to retire about 11 gigawatts of coal-fired capacity by 2035. After that, we will have 6 coal-fired power stations operating. So our fleet will be considerably reduced, and therefore we do need additional generation capacity to be built. Eskom itself does not expect to play a dominant role in this. We simply don't have the balance sheet to build more plants, nor do I think that building large generation plants is necessarily a core competence of Eskom. And we therefore wish to, through our restructuring, enable private investors to invest in new generation capacity with confidence, bearing in mind that they would like to understand some degree of certainty on their returns, bearing in mind that these are very large investments that they are required to make. And there is therefore, I think, a very clear policy direction set out in the roadmap to a restructured electricity supply industry in South Africa that was published by the Department of Public Enterprises in November of 2019. And that really sets out in quite a bit of detail exactly how the unbundling of Eskom is intended to allow the country to still meet the requirements of the electricity market, while at the same time taking cognizance of the fact that the Eskom fleet, bearing in mind its average age of about 42 years, how that fleet is now, in many instances, reaching the end of its design life. Thanks, Valia. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you, Andre. That is the last question we have. We are now at the question. Boniswa of Lesolle says people have been complaining that Eskom spends too much money on diesel. Could you tell us why it is important for Eskom to always have diesel, and what could happen if, to our power system, if there was no diesel. Boniswa, the diesel is banned in order to the lights. I'm sure we will all agree to the whole economy. André, can I ask you to make closing remarks if you are willing to make a reference to this last question as well? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sikanati. I think your signal is quite poor, so maybe Boniswa didn't get your response to that question. First of all, Boniswa, I agree that we burn too much diesel. We don't like spending money on diesel, but the open cycle gas turbines play a very important role in reducing the peak demand, particularly during evening peaks. And this is what the plants were designed for. This is why they are there. And we have in the past been using them quite successfully. So these plants are very well maintained. We make sure that we always have adequate diesel stocks available at these facilities. And that's why when I give my update at the start of these briefings, I always refer to the diesel tank levels. This is very important, and this is something that we monitor very closely. It's measured on an hourly basis, and we monitor the arrival of trucks, particularly at Ankerlig. And we therefore do everything in our power to not run out of that reserve capacity, which is really a battery, if you will, to provide against the sudden loss of generation units, bearing in mind that we have an unreliable and unpredictable system. Ladies and gentlemen, just in conclusion, we are emerging from load shedding. I want to thank my colleagues in generation for putting in an extraordinary effort to manage the number of trips that they've had, bringing units back, meeting their commitments. This is very important, and it's taken a lot of hard work and dedication. I can assure you that the teams are very focused and are working very hard. I also want to remind every South African, please, to use electricity sparingly, particularly during peak hours from about 5 o'clock in the afternoon till about 7:30 to 8 o'clock in the evening. That's when we have our highest demand on the system. And again, your cooperation to managing demand as best you can by switching off any unnecessary appliances is very much appreciated. And we look forward to your continued understanding and support during this very challenging time for Eskom and the electricity grid in general. Thank you, Sikanati. We are adjourned.